you can test what you're trying to do against a particular kind of vision or outcome. One of the sort of examples, I guess, of how this is put into action in Vietnam, the first project, when we first sort of started engaging in Vietnam, there was a definite preference for infrastructure. We need infrastructure to address deficits. We need infrastructure to address climate risks. Absolutely, can't disagree. But after going through this process over 12 or 18 months, the cities very strongly came out and said, actually what we need is a climate change coordination office. We need somewhere that we can bring this data together, that can be the central point for sectoral agencies, for government to actually come to and say, we're making decisions about infrastructure, we're doing socio-economic development planning, what do we need to know, what's the most up-to-date information. And so that's the first stage. We've been doing capacity building, but we need to continue doing capacity building and have the city be able to lead that sort of process itself. Lesson 2, I mean, we've said uncertainty all day, and I guess I've managed to fit it twice into that sentence, which is great. We've got uncertain environments already. I mean, the cities are facing a range of dynamic factors without climate change, whether they're demographic, whether they're urbanisation related, quality of infrastructure, and the being able to build on those, or recognise that uncertainty and start trying to introduce projects or activities that start to assist with that or address that are crucial. In Vietnam, there's 2 cities, Da Nang and Quy Nhon, that are looking at the interaction between their hydrological modelling, obviously facing sea level rise issues, but also their urbanisation planning, or their urban planning, and trying to bring the technologies, the different kinds of models to talk to each other, so that when the planning agency is looking at their 15, 20-year plans, they're actually speaking both technologically, but also actually engaging with the hydrological models and the water sector guys, so that they can interact in how they're planning their urban development. It sounds quite simple, but it hasn't happened before. In Indonesia, we've got, I think, Srija mentioned a wicked problem. You've got Bandar Lampung that's already facing water supply issues because of access to water supply for a majority of its population. They then access groundwater. That groundwater, the groundwater is reduced, and you start to get saline intrusion into the groundwater. So how can we improve the water supply? Yes, there's climate change issues, all kinds of uncertainties, but if we can start to address water supply issues through rainwater harvesting, for instance, I mean, that seems to be a sort of immediate action that the city can start to look at. Good planning needs good planning needs good plans and strong implementation. I think one of my sort of consistent thoughts in listening to the presentations today has been it's absolutely crucial to engage in good policy and good planning, but in some environments the governance is not strong enough, or it is still developing to actually implement those plans. We had a fascinating discussion with the Municipal Corporation of Gorakhpur, who said we want to do a climate resilient city plan. I said, great, that sounds excellent, we've got lots of new information. How effective is your current city plan? And they said, oh well, if we owned all the transport and infrastructure corridors and the open space corridors, we could implement 30% of our city plan. Okay, and how much of that do you own? Oh, not very much. Okay. So they're currently implementing about 15% of their city plan, which is probably not uncommon. And so it's like, okay, well, let's not improve your city plan as the first action. Let's actually look at ward level resilience planning. What can we do at a smaller level that we can start to understand the interactions of different types of resilience planning, drainage, community action, these kind of issues, and then build those up into the cities to actually test what we might do as a more effective way of actually achieving sort of resilience planning in the city. And effective governance requires more than just government. I think, again, this is not something that's particularly surprising as a lesson, but certainly the 2 examples I have are from India, but I think this is quite common across all the cities that we're working with, is that the ability of the city government to actually solve or address all these issues is limited to where they can influence and where where they have control, a whole range of other areas of activity that community-based organisations or NGOs or other types of organisations are much more able to act and act immediately. And or alternatively, as in the case of Surat, your municipal corporation is limited by its actual influence or control. So you then need to engage with your state governments, you need to engage with your, in this case, the Dam Control Authority, which is responsible for both reducing flooding in your city, but also your water supply. So the example in Surat is the municipal corporation working with the University of Gorakhpur, with the Dam Management Authority, to understand the kind of upstream catchment issues that are leading to them being able to manage their water supply and dam management, flood management, which links to their disaster management policies. Surat floods, they're used to it flooding, but if they can minimise the extent of those floods, that would be sensational. So there's bringing that sort of technology together with this sort of administration. Again, in Indore, the water supply issues, that Indore is in having massive donor investment in their water supply infrastructure, and that's going to improve the water supply to those that are connected to the pipes, who have pipe access. But that leaves aside the current market that's serviced by private tankers. And one of the issues identified in Indore, as a result of temperature change, it's likely that the energy supplies will become less consistent, and the water supply is reliant on the energy supply. So what are the alternatives? Where do people go for water if the energy supply fails, but also the people who can't actually access that? So looking at water source diversification, whether it's private tanker markets or whether it's access to community wells and things like that. And that's through community-based organisations, through NGOs who are facilitating that for communities to be able to identify the alternatives themselves. That's a very short sort of summary, I guess, of some of the things that are coming out of ACERN where we are. We're at sort of the midway stage of the 5-year program, and we're just beginning in 2011 to start implementing some of these projects. But as I said before, I mean, the end is not we've got to some projects, so let's do them. The process is intended to introduce a way of adaptive planning, of thinking about these kinds of issues, so that both we're learning from the projects, but we're also continually building capacity, introducing new information and understanding into those kind of 3 areas of urban systems, of climate change impacts and of vulnerability. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. So if I were just to summarize the lessons, definitely we all have been discussing about issues and problems, but definitely the 4 lessons that Sam highlighted, especially in the urban environment, that decisions need to be taken every day, and sometimes these we are talking about large-scale investments, and this is a question that came up in the morning also, that when there are large-scale investments at stake, that then what kind of information you need, or on what basis do you make a good decision. Second lesson, that climate change is adding on to uncertainty, and it's not the only uncertainty which exists. It just adds on to the different kind of scenarios that can emerge even in socioeconomic variables and other variables that exist in an urban environment. And good urban planning, we are not only talking about the design stage of the policy, but also implementation. And at what level will a policy design that you have will best be implemented? That's definitely something that has to be noted right in the beginning. And when you talk of governance, it's not only the role of governments, but also other actors, other stakeholders, including communities and civil society, NGO partners who have a lot of stake and a lot of role to play. So on that note, may I invite some questions on this presentation? Yes, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Sam, for this very interesting presentation. I have just a comment, or I just would like to put you in contact with 2 regional initiatives we are having here together with the ASEAN. The one is the Clean Air Project, a regional for middle and small cities in the ASEAN region, where we are cooperating with 10 cities, 7 to 10 cities in the ASEAN region. setting up clean air policy